Welcome to Third Eye Champagne. I'm Kirsten, Langston, author and intuitive. I have a guest today. This is Andre. Oh my God, the name of your company, Jesus. What is it?
Astrology Alert.
Astrology Alert. Why do I always blank on that? I blanked on it the other night. I was doing a live stream and I said that we were going to record this video and I said, it's astrology. I blanked on it. Okay, so this is Andre from Astrology Alert. Well, first of all, did you discover Linda or did Linda discover you?
I think Linda discovered me first and then I discovered her. So I believe she was watching my videos during possibly going back to 2020, for sure in 2021. And she was leaving some comments, that she liked them. But then I noticed that sometimes people would say, "Oh, Linda mentioned you on her channel," and I noticed that was having an effect on my channel. So then I thanked her for basically mentioning me, and then she invited me to go on her channel and talk to her, and we've been colleagues, friends ever since.
Awesome. So this is how I discovered Andre. I was on the phone with Linda, who, if you don't know, I mean, I'm sure you do, but if you don't know, I've known Linda since 10, 11, or 12, somewhere in there. And so I was on the phone with her, we're chit-chatting, and I said, man, I'm having a rough time, blah, 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 blah. She goes, oh, girlfriend, I know what to do. She's reading cards to me. She's like, you're going to be fine, you're going to be fine. But she goes, girlfriend, you know what? You need to talk to Andre because he'll give you all the timing. You know how she talks, So I go, oh, cool. So she bought me a reading with Andre. This is how I met Andre. And we hit it off right off the bat. And I'm very happy to have him here. So we're going to chit chat. I'm going to get nosy like I usually do. And then we're going to talk 2022. So I would really like to know, when did you discover astrology? When did you start doing this? What was the path that got you where you are?
I discovered it after I learned to meditate. So I started doing meditation, not for the reasons that it turned out to be good for, but it was a kind of a general, this will improve my life and my relationships and things like that. But then as I got into it, 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, I started to get this sense, for whatever reason, probably, if I had to guess, the expansive, the energy you feel, where you feel like you're more expanded inside, sense that you're more permeable. And I had this sense that I should look into the planets and astrology and things like that. But it still took me another year before I actually said, all right, time to go to the bookstore, because in those days there were no computers. So the first charts that I drew were by hand and using basic math, but it's not complicated. It's like high school math, and not even grade 12. It's like grade 9 math. It's just basic ratios. So then I started doing that about a year and a bit after learning meditation. And once I drew my first charts, it just was a language that spoke to me. I immediately noticed some things, and especially when I look back at my own life, once I got a sense, okay, these planets mean this, this, and that, and I could see 2 or 3 things that were just way too coincidental, where I thought, okay, that's really weird. That it would be, I remember this stomach problem, and I correlated it pretty precisely to the planets. I had another incident that happened when I was around 19, same thing, that I thought, this is really precise. So then it encouraged me to keep looking at charts. It's like anything, you just keep looking and looking, and as time passes, you get better and better at interpreting, at knowing what they mean, and yeah, it's that's the way it's been, and that's about 41 years ago. So I've done this a long time, lots and lots of astrology.
What are the top 3 books that you would recommend for beginners to start with?
Well, see, depends what they want to do. If the person says, "I just want to get a basic idea of how astrology works," uh, say an astrologer like Stephen Forrest, he's a great astrologer, lots of experience. Any one of his books, excellent read. If you want more technical, where the person likes to do a lot of measurements, then another astrologer, his name is Rob Hand. He's good to read. But if you want to learn astrology, then the first book is called An Ephemeris, which is a book that has the planetary cycles. Otherwise, what are you going to learn? I mean, the thing about reading books is they'll get you sort of maybe inspired, but you can't really learn astrology without interacting with it. You got to be on it. You got to be looking at where the planets are. Ideally, if you have these days, anyone can get a program or some kind of online inexpensive service to get where are the planets right now. So you have to be on them and watching. And then as you see what they're doing, you actually feel the planets. And that's what builds the most powerful internal encyclopedia. Because if you experience something in yourself, you realize, oh yeah, that's why that person feels this way. Because I just experienced this thing that I don't have, but I experienced it in passing, right? Because I can gauge the planets. So it requires participating. And so there, I mean, when I got into it, it was the first book. I got an ephemeris that I still have that is so worn that it's been taped. Now I don't even use it anymore. It's like a relic that's totally broken from a lot of use. And now, I mean, computers, you can get anything, drawn in any format you want, and you can do all kinds of fancy things. Like instead of lines where they go day by day, you can make them go every 7 days. I mean, you can do all kinds of things to facilitate your work. But again, depending on what you want to do, right? You either go for the entertainment side or you go for the I'm going to be an astrologer side, and it's a choice you have to make.
You got to make sure I'm saying this like legitimately. I'm not making shit up over here, which I tend to do sometimes. You are teaching. You have an astrology class on your Patreon, yes? Like you are showing people how to do this on Patreon.
I do. That's separate from the channel, but the people that join, they're pretty much all people that were watching me on the channel as well. But in the class, I do actual teaching where I'll teach all the symbols. This is the sun, this is the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars. When they talk to each other, you bring in examples. If you say this planet does this, you show, I don't know, Mike Pence. Why did Mike Pence, do whatever to illustrate, the way the planet. Like I'll give you an example. In my recent class, I brought up Tom Brady's retirement, but I brought up his chart. So the retirement is one cycle that inclines you to kind of feel tired of something. It's too much. And also age is involved, obviously, right? But one of the fascinating things in Brady's chart is that it shows his skill in the arms and shoulders, like throwing, right? Like his hands. Mars and Gemini. Gemini is rules that. And he not only is that his craft, I mean, that's what he does, obviously, but he's actually known to be a quarterback that relies especially on that because he's not very good at moving with his feet. Some quarterbacks run around. He just kind of hangs there. He's very accurate with his arm. So it's an example of illustrating an astrology principle through something, fairly mundane because it's not that big a deal. Who cares in a way? But this is how you learn astrology, by getting more and more categories assigned to signs and planets, so you can start to get feedback when you look at a chart, so it doesn't look like Greek. Because I mean, to most people, they look at it and they go, oh, what does this mean, all these planets? There's no way to know unless you have a lot of meanings to
Right.
play with, right?
Right. So everybody, I want you to pause this video right now. Go over to Andre's Patreon. It's not expensive. What are you charging? What is it? It's not expensive.
It's $12 a month, but
Oh,
you're getting honestly, it's incredibly cheap because I'm doing 4 1-hour classes, right, per month. So the thing is, you have the video and you can watch it again. So I mean, if you're into learning astrology, you just watch the video once or twice, make some notes, and go and practice and so forth. So yeah, all the information is there. I'm trying to also include in it the idea of what do you learn from astrology, what do you learn from life, how do you work it in, so that, for example, people that are actually trying to connect to their own self-improvement, to their own betterment, that's included as well, because that's been probably the thing that astrology has taught me the most, that it reflects this thing where if you can improve your connection to life, your planets vibrate better. It's not a
Mhm.
fixed thing. It's not like you get this chart and that's it. You're doomed to whatever it says. It's actually like a matrix of what's possible, right? And if you get better and better, the planets deliver more and more. And it's something that I'm not making up. You can actually feel it in your life as the cycles improve with your skill, right? Your skill gets better, and a cycle that used to knock you over and upset you, cause problems, becomes a lot more workable, right? And you can
Mhm.
get more out of it, and it doesn't do anything threatening, right? So
That
that
appeals to
aspect is
me.
there as well.
That appeals to me very much. I have not yet signed up for your Patreon, but I'm going to.
Mm.
It's on my very long list of things to do. It's somewhere in the middle, so I'm going to get there. But you guys, seriously, go. You should, number one, you should support Andre because he's brilliant. Number two, you should. This is like the cheapest way you're going to learn astrology. I mean, this is like the deal of a lifetime. Oh my god, sorry. I just had like a chewable vitamin. It's like stuck in my throat.
I know that feeling. Yeah.
So anyway, this is you're not going to find a better way to learn astrology for this price. I just go do it. I'm just going to be bossy and order you around and tell you to go do it. But you should definitely check it out. Check out his channel. He's also on YouTube. I think your channel's really interesting because of the way that you just now did it. I mean, I just watched you do it. This is what I love about the way you work is you take things that we all understand, like Tom Brady and his throwing arm. Like you take this and you show how it works with astrology, and it's very simple. And you do that even when on your channel, you're not teaching people, on the channel, you're showing people what's going on. This is what's happening here. This is what's happening there. This is why so-and-so had a bad week, blah, blah, blah. But we're learning as we watch. We don't know it. We don't realize it, but we're learning as we watch because of the way you explain it. I think it's really, really brilliant. I really do.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Very much so. So okay, so how did you get on YouTube? Like one day you're sitting was it like me where you were like, I have nothing to do? Like how did this happen?
Uh, I think with YouTube, I was already dabbling in it back as far as 2011, and I did some things, but I didn't have as clear a message as what emerged as more
Mhm.
years passed. And I also needed the energy and the commitment to really start it and then continue no matter what, which was a bit of a lift in the first couple of months. But then as I got more into it, then I deployed my technology knowledge and really got into it. So that was back in 2020. There are a couple of, maybe more than a couple, maybe 10 or so videos from 2018, but um, that was the least of it. I wasn't doing much then. I do remember that in 2018, I made a video at some point with Biden. Even back then, to me, it seemed like the logical, he would be the next president, right? But it was in 2020, shortly before the pandemic, when I got into it and started to do pretty much daily or 5, 6 times a week. I would put up a video, and it was kind of a difficult period for everyone too. Not only the pandemic, the political environment was just brutally crazy, insane, and but we're all home. So in a way, that helped me in that uh, I noticed being home and not being able to go anywhere, it did make it easier to just focus and produce videos. So in that way, the pandemic was good for me.
Yeah, it's I love your channel. I love the information. I am an astrology junkie. I am not an astrologer. I am a hobbyist at best. I know enough to say a little and know enough when to shut up. That is my foray into astrology. But I love watching astrologers. I only watch a few of them, so I am very happy to have added you into my astrology fold. Actually,
Oh, well, thank you.
so let's speaking of pandemic, I would like to ask your opinion on some astrology things, if you don't mind.
Mhm.
A lot of astrologers have said we're not going to be out of the pandemic until Saturn is out of Aquarius. Do you agree, disagree?
I disagree.
Hmm.
Um, and by the way, the thing with astrology is that you should never divorce it from the reality you're living in. I mean, look around. It's not just. I mean, if all you say is, "Well, planets say this," that's it. That's all it is. look around and look at the flow of life. I mean, when I do political videos, I do know the politics. It's one of my strong interests. So I blend that in and I kind of go, okay, well, the astrology says this. What does the news say? Where's this person and so on? So the pandemic, if you use the astrology, there was a video published in 2020 called The Astrology of Pandemics. It's actually quite brilliant, where the person shows that uh, uh, previous pandemics going back many, like some are thousands of years. They actually did the research to show that the
Wow.
Jupiter Saturn Pluto conjunction that we had in 2020 is a pandemic type conjunction, right?
Mm.
So then he says, when these planets separate and move apart, so that they're all occupying different signs, the pandemic will end. Back then, he said it would be May of 2021, which, if you recall, was when the vaccines came online.
Yep.
And in a lot of ways, that's when the pandemic effectively ended for many people, because people that got vaccinated, you could go outside. I mean, wear your mask. One of the things is that stadiums in Europe, I like watching soccer, and I started to notice that that's when the fans came back. So to an extent, it was May of 21. Then Jupiter, and in fact, it was quite accurate that Jupiter was in Pisces from May 21 to August of 21. And that's when we were told again, no, it's come back and we got to go back to more masking and more restrictions. And then Jupiter entered Pisces for good at the end of 2021, right at the very end, which was when Omicron came in. And if you started to notice the news around Omicron, very soon, within a week or two, there were scientists saying this thing is way more transmissible and way milder. And one of them even said it signals the end of the pandemic, because this thing is going to become totally dominant. It's going to kill off Delta, and so then more people are going to catch it, but it's going to become like a flu almost, like the what people used to say, COVID. The Trumpers would say COVID is the flu. It's not. Regular COVID is very dangerous, but on this level now, you're seeing infections dropping. Now you're already seeing governors saying kids don't have to wear masks anymore. The New Jersey guy said that today or yesterday. So you see that the flow is in that direction. However, this would be my sense of it for people that are, somewhat connected to life in a real way, smart enough to know maybe you still wear your mask for a while, you still take some precautions. If you want to say, when will people that don't get vaccinated stop dying? Yeah, that might be next spring, perhaps. It could take that long. But my feeling is, for the majority of the public, this thing is getting a lot milder, and by spring, it should be no big deal. In a lot of ways, it already is like that, because people, you see the curves. I've seen some of those curves of fatalities, and they show you this curve way up there. The people that are unvaccinated, people that are vaccinated are really low. I mean, your odds are. So then, in that sense, it's ended. But in the sense of still wearing masks, it's a bit of a hassle. And I mean, that might be the summer, maybe, but I would not say no. I would not say next spring. That's for the people who are, I don't know, what do you want to call them? Knuckleheads? I don't know. I mean,
I like
why do people do this?
I like it. Knuckleheads, sure. I like it. All right. So 2021 was characterized, I'm gonna blank out. It's, oh my God, with Saturn and Uranus. 2021 was characterized by Saturn and Uranus conjuncting.
Squaring.
Squaring, thank you. See, I knew I was gonna say something wrong.
No,
I knew it. I knew it was coming out of my mouth.
Yeah, right. No, but I think you were focusing on like 2020 Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto conjuncting. That's true. Those three were together.
Yes.
But the other one is a square. They're at 90 degrees to each
right.
other. Yeah.
So what I've been getting is I'm that they are no longer squaring. They have come apart. They squared exactly again in December.
Right, but although I believe it's still during 2022.
Right, it's still active. I was going to ask that.
Yeah, no, you see, they still square in October. No, so 2022, Saturn and Uranus are still in a square. And so, for example, in 2021, they squared early on. That's a very good reflection of the insurrection, because Uranus is the planet that plows it. Saturn is the government, and Uranus says, well, we're going to rebel and push against it. And also, the reason I say that is it happened at that time, right? It was in January of 21. So that energy still kind of continues out there, which is what we're seeing. We're still seeing pretty jagged edges around the politics. I mean, you can see Trump is dropping, but there are still a lot of Republicans that prefer Trump and so forth, right? The other thing about Saturn Uranus, which we haven't seen yet, we might see this year more, because I was expecting it to be last year. Saturn Uranus square tends to be really bad for the stock market, and
Mm,
yet the market did really well in 21. But I have a feeling we'll probably get a drop in 22
yeah.
because that square, when you look back at previous cycles, it's notorious for when there were crashes and changes in the monetary thing. And part of the reason in this case is Uranus is in Taurus, which is the money sign. So you kind of get a feeling you got to be careful. If I were not much in the market myself, but if you are, just be careful, play it a little safer than was the case in 21. You can see that part of that. You see the signals. I mean, they talk about how inflation. They're going to start raising interest rates. All those things tell you that stocks are likely to lose value, right?
Yeah, I was just reading an article on that just before I got on with you. I remember it was Washington Post, but a lot of people are concerned about the market because of that, because of the inflation and the interest rates. And I have also in my cards when I've been reading on the economy, and the economy is not the stock market. I just want to make that clear to everybody. Economy is not the stock market, but I read on both. And I've been reading on the stock market, and the cards have not been good. The cards have not. The cards have been very volatile. I'm seeing that Tower card, which is a card that, that's the card of Uranus, is the Tower card. I've been seeing it a lot. So yeah, I tarot wise, I tend to agree with you on that because that's I've been seeing it too. It's very interesting.
And the it Saturn Uranus square, it mirrors the fact that we're going into an election in November, and those planets are precisely square right around that time.
Yes.
So it's a very edgy situation. I'm more optimistic than many. People are saying like, no, the Republicans are going to win back the House and the Senate. I think they're going to win neither, in my opinion. But we'll see, right? Time will tell. My
Yeah.
feeling is no, that it's not going to go that way. That doesn't mean it isn't going to be like watching a sporting event where you're kind of biting your nails, wondering, are we gonna, can we win this? Because it could be really tight, right?
I think it's going to be really tight. I saw that. Also, it's funny. My cards. Sometimes my cards and I disagree. So sometimes I'll get a psychic feeling, and I'm like, "Well, I feel like it's going to be this," and then the cards will say the exact opposite, which is always fun to try to figure out, what's what. But I have seen for the most part, my feeling is if the Dems win, I'm a Democrat, open, proud, and free. Um, if the Dems win, it's going to be by a pretty narrow margin. I don't know that they're going to pick up any seats. The cards are a little bit wonky. The cards definitely show it's going to be a tough race, but they consistently are still showing that we're going to keep the House and the Senate. So I'm very, very
Good.
curious to
Yeah,
see.
no, there, I mean, I remember doing a video in the summer of 21 in which I can't remember what led me to do this, but it was about the 2022 elections, which were then more than a year away. And what I said, because this is one of the ways you do astrology, when you look at an election, you look at different people's charts who are affected by the election, because whatever's happening in their charts tells you something about the election. So Biden has this really sweet, beautiful aspect in November of 2020. All of November is choice, victorious, happy energy. So all I asked is, I said, what is Biden so happy about in November of 2020? He can't lose the House. If Biden loses the House, just the House, that is just a nightmare. The way that the Republicans are behaving, it's not an ordinary loss. That's a catastrophic loss because they're plotting revenge and insanity. I mean, things you read, these people have lost their marbles. So I can't see how he would be settled and happy at that time if it didn't turn out relatively positive. But there's more because you can look at Liz Cheney, you can look at Mitch McConnell. I don't have a time for him, but just with the day. There's a chart for Kevin McCarthy, which doesn't look great. McCarthy thinks he's going to get the House. That chart is pretty compromised in November of 2022. So how does that work? If you look at a chart and you say, it should show victory, like something. But it shows a bit of something, but not enough to convince me that it's a winner's chart, right? So, and there'll be more as we get there. We'll see different players that'll have an effect and so forth. But I'm cautiously optimistic, and likely I would agree with you that if they win, it won't be by a by a big victory. You know, in some ways, the way the current scenario is, if you think about uh, not so much putting a positive spin, but just looking at it in a really practical way, you could argue that if the Democrats win by a smaller margin, it tends to cause the Republicans, like what happened in 2020, to self-suicide even more. Because the reason Trump has any power today is because he lost pretty close. If he had been completely wiped out, they would have gotten rid of him. As it is, this guy's been around and he's causing horrendous problems for them because he lost them Georgia. That was Trump. Trump told the voters, "You don't need to vote." They didn't vote. I mean, you can look at the numbers and you can see that in the general election, not long before, more of them voted, and then they didn't show up. That is crazy. You assign it to him, right? And now he's doing it again. He's saying, if you don't agree that the election was stolen, my voters won't even vote.
I was just, you know what? I was just so I follow this guy on TikTok. He's a sociology professor. His name's Casey Little. And he was talking about how we're going to start to see a switch in the Republican messaging from, everything's rigged and don't vote as we get closer and closer to the election, which is, oh, wait, everybody go vote. Because, I mean, he's saying, they're taking a real, and he's right, they're taking a risk. I think they're too stupid to know they're taking this risk. But they're taking a risk by telling everybody, oh, it's rigged, it wasn't right, blah, 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 because people just won't show up. They just won't vote then.
Yeah, no, and you don't need many. I mean, politics is such that you have to picture millions of people. All you have to do is take a chip off the block. If that's what happened in Georgia, many did show up, but if in politics, if a million stay home because they get that in their head, you're screwed, right? And the problem you have is they can say, yeah, we're going to start doing this properly and we're going to tell people to vote. But then there's Trump. You can't control Trump. He'll just say something else, and they're scared to push him back really harshly because he controls a lot of the voters. Right? He's infected the party. So I think they're going into this in a weak state, and I think that's what's going to help the Democrats potentially, emerge.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have a question. So, and like, let me know if I'm rambling too much because I'll keep you for a long time if I can.
Oh, no problem. Ask anything. Yeah.
So if you have something like a party, like the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, Labor, Tory, whatever, could you be able to do a chart, like a birth chart for them? Like, is that something that would be possible?
You can do charts for anything. I mean, in astrology, the moment of time, the moment in time, right, is correct. The problem is that it's hard to get charts that reflect the actual accurate moment in time because people will say, well, this is when the party started. And then, the Democratic Party or whatever. I've seen, for instance, Republican Party charts. But then the astrologer then goes looking to see if it makes sense by looking at certain, patterns in the past and so forth. And the problem with a lot of those charts is that it's hard to get a chart that you can trust. You can say this chart is probably the right chart. Once in a while, I'll run into a chart that I'll say, yeah, this is pretty good. Like someone sent me the chart for Portland and they said Portland is a total mess now. There's crime on the streets, a lot of homeless people. It's really bad. And the chart they sent, I thought, yeah, this is pretty good. It made sense to me based on what happened in 2020 and so forth. But other times I've looked at big charts like that, origin of parties, where I'll say, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And so then, depending on what I have, and I don't think I have a good chart that I would use for just Republican Party, Democratic Party. That's pretty tricky, to find one. And so then I do the players in the party. And because what are you getting at the idea of being able to outright predict which party would win and things like that? Is that the question?
I'm just curious. It's just, my Gemini moon coming through, curious.
Yeah, no, and if you can find them, like I remember, for instance, another amazing chart that was so astrologically tight was, remember that event of the building that collapsed in Florida?
Oh, yeah.
So I found the Miami chart because there was actually a foundation of Miami where it happened, right? Yeah. And then the Florida foundation, both charts were remarkable in showing this thing. And I thought, wow, this is, because whenever I see something that I can say, this actually fits a fallen building, which is really sad. But
it's fascinating though.
I shouldn't be smiling about it, but for an astrologer, it was like, it's like you're a vulture, right? You're circling over but you're saying, yeah, this is accurate for astrology.
Yeah.
The planets you would expect, right? Show up. and illustrate the timing of it.
That is fascinating. So when it comes to the US, I feel like people use different things. They'll use the day of the Declaration of Independence, or they'll use other dates. I mean, do you have a
Yeah,
thought preference on that?
that's actually a really great question because the chart that I use, I'm like a traditionalist in that the majority of astrologers, particularly the ones that have been doing it longer, seem to like this chart, right? But then you get disagreements. The chart that I use is by an astrologer whose name was Sibley, and the chart that he casts is for 5:10 p.m. July 4th, 1776 in Philadelphia because it was there was an actual public celebration,
Mm.
in the public market or whatever it was, the public square. There was all this yelling and screaming that this country had been formed. And if you think of the logic of that versus, for instance, there are counter charts that say, no, no, that's not right. You should use the one when they were in the middle of the night at 3:30 a.m. They all met, with their like gas lamps and they wrote the document. For one thing, this was a revolution. They were leaving England. There was no guarantee that this was going to be formed until the public knew and the public agreed. The public is part of the country. It's a democracy. For one thing, how can you talk about a chart without including the people? It makes no sense to me. But more to the point, the Sibley chart vibrates phenomenally well. For example, you look at 9/11, it's right there. You see this axis getting massively hit at 9/11, and you think, wow, that's pretty coincidental. In astrology, whenever you see a really strong coincidence, trust it because that astrology is the study of meaningful coincidence, right? It's the idea that it happens, you see it, and so therefore it reflects the chart. So basically, that's the logic. But as I say, subject to continuous study, continue looking at it. Like as another example, there's a measurement in astrology that's called a progression, where you look the days after birth, and you project them into the years after birth. And there was a very neat change in that type of measurement right when Biden got elected, like between Trump and Biden. You could
Oh
see
wow.
a switch from almost like the government being fascist to the government being more democratic, right? Which told me this was another thing. But again, with this, then you would say, even if I say, okay, I like this chart that I use, I'm always open to anybody saying to me, here, look at this other chart and prove to me, give me evidence. Yeah, if you show me evidence that another chart works better, I'll use it. It's just that I haven't seen it yet. Today, this is the one that I find most accurate, and that's why I use it. And, it's also the day when we'll celebrate July 4th, but where it might be a little counterintuitive is that there are people who say, I'll give you an example. There's one astrologer that I remember from about 15 years ago who was convinced that we should be using, I think he said 2:10 p.m. because on the, well, I mean, this could be true. I mean, it's a good argument. I just don't think it works. But he said that on the money, on the bills, you could see the clock with 2:10 on it.
Oh,
So he said, well, it had to be then. I thought, I don't know about that. I mean, I want to see more evidence. Besides, it doesn't correspond, with the events of the chart. Like I'll give you another example for the 5:10, right? 5:10, and this, by the way, appended his argument neatly because he kept saying that the economy was going to crash, and if you do the 5:10 chart, the economy crashed when Obama came into power, which was Pluto switching from Sagittarius to Capricorn. Capricorn is the U.S. money house, so it made perfect sense that you would see this switch at that time, right? There's other evidence. I mean, the healthcare reform that Obama brought in. That's a video that I put on my channel where you see the topic in Obama's chart and in the U.S. chart, and they both point
wow.
to the health house, and they only point to that house if you use the 5:10 p.m. or like thereabouts, right? So that's how
Oh,
you know that something is up and is probably vibrating correctly for that chart, right?
oh, that's
I mean,
fascinating.
it's a long story, but hope I'm not boring too many people.
But you're not. No, you're not going to bore anybody. Are you kidding me? This is absolutely fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. And what I like too about what you do again is like you don't get super cerebral and super technical, so people don't understand it. I mean, what you're saying is accessible to everybody. You know,
Oh, I try. Yeah, no, that's important. Yeah, because the thing with astrology is that if you just do the lingo and talk technical, well, yeah, if the room is full of astrologers, everyone is, it's like everybody's talking Greek or whatever, or Finnish or what at the same time. But if person doesn't know astrology, you got to put it in English. You got to put it in a language that that is tied to life in some practical way, right? Otherwise, what's the use? So yeah, yeah.
I have two more questions for you, and then I'm going to let you go. But they might be long questions. So, okay, for all of us out there who are obsessed with our personal lives, and we're borderline narcissists, we want to know about us, us, us. How does something like these outer planets, like Saturn, Uranus, how would that affect an individual? Because usually outer planets kind of are more societal, right? Like it's more like this is how it affects the world. But I know that it can affect us. How?
Well, actually, okay, so you just said something that's true, but then you have to add something. So they are out there, they are societal in that when you think about it, it's logical. If you start going Saturn, Uranus, the further out you go, the more people are born with that planet. Because if Uranus is right now it's in Taurus, it's in Taurus for 7 years. So everybody born for 7 years has Uranus in Taurus. But what happens is that your chart at birth is like a snapshot, and then the planets keep moving. Like the instant you're born, they're still moving. The universe is constant motion. There's no such thing as stillness. Even if you are doing stillness practices, to develop something in yourself, your body and mind, there's lots of motion, right? So everything is moving. Then what happens is those planets, as they move, they do things to the original position. So you've got this grid that is yours, and then as they move, they do angles to where
Mm,
they were. So, like for example, an easy way to understand it would be maybe you're born in that part of the sky over there was your whatever, your sun, your Mercury, some planet that was for you. But then some years pass, and there's a big planet out there like Pluto or something on the other end of that Mercury. It'll be opposing it, right? And that's when stuff happens to you, right?
mm,
So they affect you. What it turns out to be that the inner planets like Sun, Mercury, Venus, the Moon, because it's next to the Earth, and say Mars, the ones that are closest, they're the ones that get the most energy from the outer planets in terms of
mm,
what happens to you. The outer planets affect them, right? They point to them, and that's when you feel really personal things happening in your life, and you get periods where, for example, say if you're one of the fixed signs right now, if you're Scorpio, Taurus, Scorpio, Leo, Aquarius, that's the four corners that are fixed. Saturn, because it's in Aquarius, it's challenging each of those signs because it's either conjoining, opposing, or at 90 degrees squaring. So
mm.
then the person feels like they're in this transitional period where something is happening that is changing their life, moving it in a new direction. And Saturn is not that comfortable because that's the way Saturn works. Saturn teaches you by giving you a hard time. If I just want to be, direct about it, it gives you a hard time. I mean, it's great. You develop character, you even grow more, sure, but it's not doing it through, complimenting you or giving you freebies like the way say Jupiter would. Jupiter is the kind of planet that would do that. But that's the answer there is to say you've got your chart, and then you got to see where are those outer planets today
Mm,
and where were they before. Because when I said earlier, how did I get into astrology? I was 21, 22, and I was looking back when I was 14, when I had no connection to astrology at all, but I could look in the ephemeris and see, well, they were there. I could see. So then I'm matching and going, that planet was opposed, and it looks a little too coincidental for this to just be made up because I knew the body parts, what they ruled, and so forth. And so as a result, I drew those conclusions. So that's the answer to why you've got these planets that, yeah, if you want to talk about collective energies because they're way out there, and many people, like for example, the people now that are collectively are responsible for the people that go to the health stores, they're really obsessed with health food and having organic and all that. That's the generation born between 1957 and 1970 because Pluto was in Virgo. and
Oh,
that hyper emphasizes health. And when they start to, as a group, have more money, they start spending it, and that group now is fully, they're fully mature. They've got money to spend, so they. That's when people say, "Oh, that industry is raking in billions," because that generation, right, is, and that would be where they're born in that generation. So then they bring that factor into life. That's a collective force, right? But that's separate from saying Pluto can be anywhere. What's it doing to your chart, right? And Pluto, as an example, it's way out there, 250-year orbit. When it finds you, it'll change you because it rules death. So either it kills you, hopefully not. I mean, maybe eventually it does, but in between, you get a Pluto transit, perfect time to mutate and change and leave something completely behind and become something new, right? And it's actually can be very powerful. Like an example is Bruce Springsteen, when Pluto was on his sun by conjunction, was when he exploded into the music industry.
oh
He became
wow.
a superstar because it literally pushes you up a big level, above from where you were. So in that way, it's incredibly useful. Yeah.
All right, I have to. I actually okay. I have actually two more questions.
Okay, no problem. Yeah.
All right, so this is like I don't know. Just we're talking about the chart, so it kind of came to me. Could you look at somebody's chart and like, for instance, Betty White? I mean, she was what, nearly 100 years old. But could you have looked at Betty White's chart and say, okay, yeah, she's gonna die at this point in time? Like, can you do that? Can you go? Not that I don't know if anybody would want that, but could you do that? Look at somebody's chart and say, hey, you're probably gonna die here. Like, this is the time you're gonna die.
Well, the way that works is that you do need to know the context, right? So the when actually she's a great example because sometimes when someone dies and they're 100 years old, maybe you find one angle or something like this would be like astrology / natural causes because you go, well, I mean, I'm looking at this and they died because they were really old and there's one thing, right? Hers actually was pretty intense when she died. There were multiple things happening that were very threatening to her health. But then you say, but she was 100 years old. So
Right.
then, so the answer there would be that if that alignment that she had happens at a younger age, it is like a death door, but she may not die. She may just mutate and change,
Mm,
including, for example, let's say that it was not just intense with lots of angles, but you even saw the health house. So you really saw, wow, this is dangerous. Then maybe the person is like 20 years old or 30 years old, 40 years old, and they have a health crisis. And those are the periods where they would mutate into something bigger and their life changes. Maybe they even, sometimes the person will become a healer as a result of that, because they transmute the energy. So the context is super important to get in astrology. Um, and and then you have to kind of gauge, okay, what's the diagnosis? How long has it been happening? Where are the planets going next? Like what I'll do with things like that is, if someone is quite sick, let's say, then what I want to know is how long has it been, and then I'm looking at how long is this going to last? Because
mm,
if I see someone who says, well, I'm in a stage 4 cancer, and I see 2-3 more years, then I think, okay, that's not good because you gotta, then I'll tell them, I mean, you've got to work at it this long. Maybe you get through, maybe you don't, right? It's that kind of thing where there's intense pressure. So I guess long answer to say, it's not so much that when someone dies, is that you see the death doors, you see the potential for something that is a major transformation, which could include death itself, but which actually, interestingly, is the most useful in terms of being alive because it's when you can change the most. That's what's ironic, right? Where someone will say, oh, I don't want to, as soon as you hear death door, you go, I don't want that. Actually, when you get those doors are when you can really go to another level because you can leave your old self behind and bring in the self that you can be. How I said earlier, what's possible instead of what you've built up to that point, which may not be that effective, right?
So, would you look at the eighth house for something like that typically, or is it kind of wherever?
No, the eighth. Okay, so in astrology, it would be you look at the sixth and eighth. The sixth is health, the eighth is death. Those two are critical. The 12th being the other polarity to the sixth is really important. You also know because it rules hospitals. It's pretty obvious, right? And then you look at the first house, it's the house of the body. So you look at what's going on with that, and then you just see what kind of swirling energy there is. Is there a lot of like Betty White, even at 100, had a massive hit to her sixth. I mean, that's black and white. It's not going to be good for your health at any age. Right? It's a bit of a threat. But she was really old, and I mean, you know, when you're 100 years old, I mean, she had a stroke, by the way. This happens a lot when people are that old. They definitely, or they frequently, I should say, a stroke will happen that doesn't kill them, but it's the final thing that, you know, it's the unwinding of the system. And in hers, I did a thing. She was in one of my classes, and then I put a short video on my channel where I showed it was actually Pluto. Okay, well, there's an example. Pluto was on her sun. Okay, now think about that, right? Okay, so she's a Capricorn, was a Capricorn. Pluto, it had to travel 100 years from its original position, and it hadn't even reached the halfway point, I believe, because it's got this huge orbit, right? But it coincided with her passing when Pluto was there. But then she had other things that were increasing the energy even more. So I would say with her chart is a chart of longevity, like a really successful life, where eventually something has to happen. But I interpret it as, in other words, imagine, you know, those things where they tell you and they say, well, you chose this life. I don't know how that works, by the way, because I don't remember choosing anything. but let's say that it's true, right? And so then it's like, instead of St. Peter greeting you on the way back, they're greeting you on the way to Earth. It would be like, you're going to live a long life, a very creative, long life with great health. But everybody dies at some point, right? And it just so happened that with her, at the end, it's pretty clear, you know, what the aspects were. If I can think of one in my mind, there's a mystic that I studied, you know, that guy, Krishnamurti. His name is around.
Oh, yeah.
So Krishnamurti, there's a chart for him, which seems pretty accurate because it's got a time. And I remember studying it and thinking that, I think in his 90s, and it didn't look that, it just looked like a couple of minor things, right? But he was just at that age. And so it was like what I called astrology / natural causes, because it didn't take, you know, 4 or 5 big things the way Betty White had at the end. Right?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, 2 more questions. I swear to God, I'm going to be done. I promise. So, what are your thoughts on this Venus-Mars conjunction? Because they're going to be conjunct for a while in 2022.
Well, they're conjunct. Okay, so Venus is Mars is right now at 10 plus degrees, and Venus is at 12, right? So what do you mean by a while, if I may ask you that?
Well, from what I understand, they don't typically run around together for this long, because I think that it's going even until April. I could be wrong with that though, so don't quote me on that one. But a lot of other, you know, like I said, I'm an astrology junkie. They're talking about, like, you know, it's like, oh, it's a big deal. Is it a big deal?
Well, the big deal is, and this is another thing about astrology that I've gotten into arguments with some people, in particular my 2 other astrologer sisters. We've had a few like arguments about, because they'll take this position, and I've always been, you know, really direct in saying the most important part is to relate it to your chart. Like there are all these astrologers who will say there is this conjunction and then there's this other thing in the sky, or like since Saturn is squaring Uranus, everybody's feeling this way. This can't possibly be true. I mean, think about that, how crazy a statement that is. Not everybody's feeling that way. Some people do it, some people don't. Some people actually benefit from these cycles and some don't, right? So when you look at, yes, Mars and Venus, they're doing this thing where Capricorn and Aquarius, they're kind of chasing each other and they're conjunct a lot. But the trick is, yes, what it does is it creates two planets together. So there's a planetary force. What's it doing to your chart? Mm-hmm. So if it catches some part of your chart, which would mean, for example, in Capricorn, if you have planets in Capricorn, Cancer, Aries, or Libra, which are the 4 corners of that, then that's going to have more impact than if it was just one of the planets. It's sort of the logic of more planets, more intensity. It's the same logic why Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto pandemic, big dogs, you know, all together like that, sending a lot of energy. when they're not together, it's not as potent, right? So that's what it would be. And then when they're in Aquarius, it would be Aquarius, Leo, Scorpio, Taurus. So I mean, that it's a long answer story to say. The answer is you got to see what it's doing to your own chart. That's the thing. To then pin it and say things like because they're conjunct, what do people say? Have you heard anything around? Because you said it's a
Oh,
big
they're
deal.
conjunct, so everybody's going to be focusing on relationships. Love and sex are on the table. You know, that kind of collective energy. Good time to get into a relationship. I don't necessarily subscribe to that one specifically at all. But you know,
Yeah.
stuff like that. That's kind of the general, you know, collective reading that people
Well,
are.
I would say that would not be my. What that's to me, statements like that are they're like almost like pure entertainment because when are love and sex not on the table, when are relationships not on the table, show me some numbers, show me something that proves there's an actual relation between those two. Now mind you, it's true, if Venus Mars together affect some part of your chart, yes, that could be true for you, right? Like for example, say suppose I'll give you an example, say that a person has Leo rising, okay, and that means Aquarius is in the marriage house on the other side. We know Saturn is there. Saturn is notorious for inclining you toward commitment. It always says, well, you know, you should set something up that is going to be long lasting and sign a contract, like get really serious about this. So that's on the person's mind. And then Mars and Venus go through there in like April. You know, so then that adds energy to that house. And then there might be another something else. So all of a sudden, that person, it's completely real for them and it becomes an important factor. But maybe a separate person has Aquarius in a completely different house, like say it's in their education house. So now the Mars Venus is affecting that house, and maybe they would say, "Oh yeah, well yeah, it's sort of true because I made this relationship with this person, and they moved my academic career forward." Or in other words, it'll take a completely different angle or a completely different picture, and so you have to calibrate it, find out where they are. And bottom line, it comes back always to what I say to people: if you don't know where your planet positions are, don't expect to get any deep insight into your chart because you're taking information that is too general, too broad, and you're trying to give it meaning in your life without knowing, where exactly is it manifesting in your chart in a specific way, right?
So what I'm hearing is essentially I'm watching YouTubers that are the equivalent of reading my horoscope in a newspaper. Is that?
Well, I mean, somewhat. I don't want to I don't want to insult them or anything, and I don't want to say that they're.
Oh, then nobody knows who I watch. It's okay.
Yeah, no, but I mean, even the approach, right? Like the whole idea is that yeah, there's a lot of information that is can be true, but it's applied in too general a way, and then the results that are, then people will say, well, I don't know, I read that, but I didn't see anything, it didn't happen, and it causes them to lose faith.
Right.
In a language that is actually quite precise if you have a precise chart, right? I mean, the chart is such that if you have an actual time to the minute, there are movements that if you get that wrong, you'll be off by years later in the change that happens. And yet the changes that happen are very real and verifiable. And it's why, why is astrology around today? People think it's because everybody's stupid and like we're all happy-go-lucky thinkers and we just make it up. It's because astrologers have spent millennia passing information around, right? And as they tell each other, well, look what happened. See, this planet keeps doing this, and then these rules emerge. And so, in that sense, it's very scientific. It's not just an art. Why does Saturn have the reputation it has? Because that's what it does, right? I mean, every time, or Pluto, or Uranus, or whatever, you just see. I remember. You see the effect. I remember this TV thing many years ago. They were talking to these astrologers on TV, and of course, you know what it is. Like if you're doing a show, sometimes you want to get the most extreme or the most sensational effect to like prove a point. So what they did is they gave them these charts, and they said to them, "Well, what kind of person do you think this is?" And I don't know if all of them did, but most of them said they agreed. This is almost like a person who would be struck by lightning, right? And it turned out it was a person that had been struck by lightning multiple times, and it was because Uranus, which is the struck by lightning planet. Let's just say that, right? In fact, this person had been struck by lightning, like it had gone right through their hat
Oh
and
my
left a
God.
hole in it. And that would be like, maybe this is where you would find in the chart, struck by lightning but not killed, like something where the Uranus wasn't completely lethal, right?
Right.
So you see effects like that, but that's sensationalizing it. And it's not really the point. I mean, that adds, in a way, credibility to people. Okay, see, astrology must be true. The real juice of astrology is in studying charts, especially your own chart, and figuring out how to do the planets better, how to be more connected to what the planets promise, as a kind of potential, as a kind of possibility, and then everything progresses and gets better. And this includes, by the way, sometimes you look at a chart and you'll see, wow, that relationship house looks pretty rough, and the person will say, it's just not working well. So then, if that person can begin to work on it, really try to improve it, they're the ones that end up writing the books on astrology, because, or like not on astrology, on relationships,
Right.
because they say it's Saturn, right? They work and work and work, and then they're in a position to give back what they learned. If the person is already naturally talented, they say, yeah, that works. I don't know what to say. It works. There's no explanation. So then they can't be good teachers around it, right? But if
Right.
they're forced to learn, then so that tells you that the chart is not a rigid map. It's a map that is subject to growth, and then cycles improve and get better over time, right?
I love that. Okay, last question. What is the most interesting astrology you have your eye on? Like, what astrology of 2022 interests you the most?
Other than, if I'm being selfish, other than my own,
Right.
what interests me the most? Well, I would probably say what interests me the most at two levels. One level would be, I always have a running theme in learning, getting better at figuring out how planets work any which way I can, so I can pass it on to people in a way that is useful to them, right? So if I can get an insight where I'll go, that planet is that, and then I can bring it forth and use it as some kind of guidance, some kind of suggestion, that would be top of the list always, right? The personal astrology. But if you ask me in terms of the world, probably the political situation, because I definitely have a dog in the race. I am definitely not, I'm definitely pro-democratic, because I'm progressive in my thinking, and because I think it's pretty important. I mean, we're kind of in a rough situation here, so I'm really watching that to see if what I'm sensing is going to bear out around, all the charts that I study, that I look at, things that are happening. So I'll be timing, like, for example, when I'm looking at a news story of something that just happened, I'll go look at the chart to see, does that match, and where could this go? Or, this is how you see people like this guy, Matt Gates. He's in trouble because his chart is a mess. You don't want to be, the guy, when you see sex problems in the chart, and then the person is being accused of something in that area, and you watch him operate, and then you read some news, you think, wait a second, this isn't going to a good place. This is sort of the logic of it, right? So that keeps me interested in that. The topic is pretty important, right? And then, how does it match up with what I'm seeing? And then it's a kind of a constant learning. And presumably, if you're into any subject, you like interacting with it. I mean, to me, I never thought of astrology as work. To me, it's always been this thing that I do. It's fun, to look at charts and wonder, well, what could that mean? And something new that I learned that I can pass on, something about myself, you name it, it's all there, and it's more fun than homework. And in fact, you could say that's one of the ways if you're going to be a good astrologer. If you say things like, "Oh well, I haven't learned much because I don't have time." It's not a question of time. If things that you like, you make time for.
Yes. Yes.
You just do it, right? If you have to make time, take up something else, because it's more likely to progress. Right? Yeah.
Absolutely. That was amazing. Thank you very, very much. That was
Pleasure.
um really informative. I'm like mind blown over here. I love your philosophy. I love the way you explain everything. And I think it's nice for people to hear that you're not rigidly locked into your chart, because I think a lot of people, even, when they watch me when I'm doing tarot, I always say, it can change. I've seen it change. And I think a lot of people in the, although I sort of hesitate to call astrology metaphysical because I think it's actually, it's a real science. This is not science. Tarot cards are not science. Um, but I think a lot of people think, well, once it's in the chart or once the cards say it, and that's it, and I'm locked in, and oh well.
No, I mean, well, I mean, again, it depends. It depends who you speak with. I always say this is the way I see it. I don't really want to explain, but I always say to people, at most 20 or 25%, maybe less, of your life can be rigid because you're born with certain genetics and certain patterns like COVID. COVID is we got to adapt. I mean, you can't pretend it isn't there. That's the
Right.
whole point. But the other three quarters or more is what you do to align with life, with circumstances, right? So the tarot, though, I don't know that I would say it's unscientific. It's just more that it would be if I did it or with my philosophy, right? Let's say that a person said to me, uh, "There's the classic." I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing that a lot of the questions are relationship questions, right?
Yeah.
A person, and of course, one of my favorite thoughts in my mind is I'll think if you're asking about it, it's probably not a good thing. Because why would you ask about it, right? So then immediately you think like if life is a casino, you're already in a sense betting against the question. But let's say that you throw the cards and it doesn't look good. It just looks so then one way is to say, well, you know what? No, this person, forget it. It's not gonna work. But you could also say, well, based on what I have here, your current flow, this doesn't look good. There might be a way to change the flow. Maybe that's up to you. What can you do? Like, for example, if you, the power of prayer, the power of meditation, what that does is it actually chips away at your karma, at your not things that are not working well. You're actually smoothing it, changing it. And so it's possible that you'll be able to change this, but based on what I see here, this doesn't look good. So maybe then you give them an out as far as, it's not totally rigid in stone. I mean, and I know this from in my own life. I've had a few times I was told stuff by psychics or tarot readers that I thought was I didn't like it. I thought, well, I don't want that to happen. So then I increased my practice and it didn't happen. And that sort of taught me that maybe it works that way. Then I found, it turns out by luck or not, whatever, I found this great Zen master that I've studied, over the years. And I saw this chapter where he actually explained that that's exactly what it is, that you can reverse a bad or at least ameliorate. The way he put it actually was really, in a way, a bit comedic. He goes, well, suppose someone tells you that they see in your future that in December you're going to have a car accident, right? And you're going to end up in the hospital and you're going to be really, really at death's door. So he said, what you need to do is do a lot of breath work, chanting, get really serious about correcting your karma. And then he says, maybe then you only break your arm instead of dying, right? It pushes it back. And I mean, ideally, you'd want to sidestep the accident altogether.
Right.
But that's a bit of a different model because then if you say, no, everything is rigid, you don't want to believe that. But think about how disempowering it is, right? To say to a person, that's it, this is what's going to happen.
It is. It's awful.
I mean, for one thing, I mean, think about your trajectory on YouTube, right? What you've done on YouTube and in other places, because you've got a presence in all kinds of places. Imagine someone said to you before you started that, they go, I'm looking at Kirsten, I'm looking at your whatever it is. You're going to be really successful, and then you say, well, good. I'm just going to watch movies and eat potato chips. You do nothing. Nothing will. I mean, it'll take forever, right? You have to engage and get in there. So then that part of it is very important as part of the equation, right? And so, for good or for not so good, the whole idea is to pass on that message that there's the fated side, then there's the side where you participate. No matter what tool you're using, it's super important to remember that.
Yeah. It's funny you bring up car accident because one morning I woke up. Immediately in the morning, I woke up, my eyes open, and I went, I'm going to get in a car accident today. I mean, it was psychic. I knew it. I'm going to get into a car accident today. I went, oh, shit. So, and I was driving all over San Francisco. It was a rough drive. And it's like, I'm always nervous doing this particular drive. And the whole time I'm like, I did. I got into my meditation space and I was like, okay, we're okay. Like, we're just not gonna happen, and I'm just gonna get into a good space, blah, blah, blah. I do the whole drive. Everything's fine. I'm driving beautifully, everything's okay. Nobody's even come close to me. Everything's fine. And I had seen this, like, it's a bad accident. Like, I'm gonna get into a bad car accident. I knew it. I mean, I knew it. And what ended up happening is I was on the freeway, and something came into my car, like something smashed into my car on the left side. And sure enough, blew my tire. But that was it. And that was
Yeah,
nothing like what
yeah,
I had seen that morning. That morning I was like, oh man, and my car is going to be towed. I mean, I had seen it. I knew it. So of course I'm trying to avoid it. And I ended up avoiding it. I mean, yeah, it still happened, but
yeah,
I blew the
yeah.
tire. I ended up paying a couple $100.
Yeah, that's the perfect example, because the logic would be that if you get a psychic impression, then I mean, maybe you don't care, but most people would say, okay, well, I just saw the accident. I want to remain safe. So then this is where people say, yeah, surround yourself with light, do practices, do actual mind focus, and then something happens, but you fixed it, or,
Yeah,
even if it had been a little worse, but you emerge perfectly fine. The whole idea is you not, but what can happen though, you could be the one that gets the psychic thing, and then you freeze and you get really scared and you think, oh my God, it's gonna happen. And maybe you're the one that the tire hits you, right? The thing comes, and then you saw it and it happened. That's not helpful. I mean, I'm sorry, but
true.
unless you're suicidal.
I completely agree with you. I
Yeah,
completely.
exactly. So uh,
So, okay, are you doing private readings? Are you currently available for those?
I am. Yeah, if you go to my channel, you'll see in the about. It's in the about area. You click there, and then you have to go to a calendar and book it. And it's
Okay.
a sometime. I still have openings in February, but not for a while, 2 or 3 weeks. But
Okay.
yeah, I do
So
them. Yeah,
you guys, I'm gonna put all of Andre's information, including his Patreon. Go sign up. I'm gonna get off this and go sign up. You go sign up, take those damn astrology classes, and listen. I had a private reading with him. He's great. He's brilliant. Do it. You should do it. Do it before everybody does it, and then his prices go.
yeah. I mean, the thing I'll say about that is that when I read charts, I read them from the vantage point of what is possible within what the person is trying to do. That's
Right.
the key thing, right? It's much less about, oh my God, your life is doing whatever. Yeah, but where do you want to go? Where
Yep.
are you pointing the ship? And then the chart shows you, it gives you really good guidance. And in that way, it's a fabulous strategic language.
Yeah. It's really, the way you read is incredibly empowering, and I've appreciated it ever since the day you read for me. Actually, it's been pretty brilliant. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for joining me. Andre, thank you so much for joining me. You're amazing. I'm very glad that Linda connected us. You guys check everything out. Everything will be in the box, and we will see you soon.